Tourists are flooding into Japan this year because currency values matter to everyday people, whether they follow exchange rates regularly or not. Travel to Japan has not been this cheap in nearly 40 years, which is a lifetime for many people. According to the World Economic Forum, Japan is the third most popular foreign travel destination around the world behind the US and Spain. I was one of those tourists taking advantage of the weak currency to take my two young boys, 6 and 9, to Japan for a summer holiday. We went in July just as dollar yen broke above 160. It was fantastic. If I traveled the same time last year when dollar yen was around 140, everything would have been about 14% more expensive. Our trip was an absolute blast, giving me first-hand insight into the effects of a weak Japanese yen and the current inflation landscape in Japan. In this video, I'll share some fascinating observations that will hopefully give everyone a better understanding of Japan's economic situation and what the future might hold. Hello everyone, I'm Kathy Lee with BK Traders. We cover everything from Forex fundamentals to trading strategies and prop firm news on our channel. So subscribe now and hit the notifications button if you don't want to miss any one of our great videos. I've been to Japan many times before, but aside from a brief layover this past March that included a quick visit to the Suzuki fish market for sushi, it has been 9 years since I've truly traveled through the country, and a lot has changed. I will talk about all of that, but first, what I observed is that most of the tourists are actually non-Americans like me, but from South Korea, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and Southeast Asia. Actually, it's not just an observation, but a fact reported by Japan's official tourism website. Take a look at this. Overseas resident visits to Japan by country and region. Number 1, Korea, followed by China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia. The US is far down the list over here underneath Spain. So while there are a lot of US visitors, they pale in comparison to the visitors that Japan is seeing from Korea, China, Taiwan. While everyone is talking about how weak the Japanese yen has been against the US dollar, the yen has also fallen quite a bit against the Chinese yuan and the Hong Kong dollar to a more than 30-year low. In other words, it hasn't been this cheap for the Chinese to travel to Japan in more than 30 years as well, having been trapped under very strict COVID regulations for more than many other countries. Outbound tourism is traveling, but the problem with China is that their economy is also slowing. So Chinese travelers have been more attracted to lower cost destinations like Japan than a place like the US, where they had to contend with a strong US dollar. And when the Chinese travel, they love to spend, especially for those that actually have money to travel. They particularly love to spend on luxury goods. And the same is true of South Koreans. Now, while the yen has only fallen to a 17-year low against the South Korean won, that has not stopped them from taking advantage of a good deal. And a good deal it really is to travel to Japan and shop. Not only is the exchange rate 14% lower, but on top of that, any total purchases of 5,500 yen or more is tax-free, which means that you also get an instant 10% discount on top of the exchange rate value. A 5,500 yen purchase is nothing. It's basically $35. So you can imagine how much tourists are spending to prop the economy up. Now, to put this into perspective, I'm going to do this in US dollar terms. A tag watch in Tokyo sells for about 785,000 yen or $5,000. After the 10% tax-free discount, that's more than a $1,300 discount from what it costs in the US, which is about $6,500. The classic black lambskin Chanel purse in Japan also costs about $1,500 less than the US. Now, I didn't buy any of these, but I did buy a few Japanese Pokemon booster boxes for my sons, which cost only $35 US compared to $100 back at home. Of course, that difference has more to do than just the exchange rate, but everything was very cheap. Even water, I paid $5 for a bottle of water here in the airport in New York before I left, compared to 65 cents anywhere in Japan, including the airport. Food was very inexpensive. A sushi dinner for 5 at a local rotating sushi restaurant in Tokyo cost $50 compared to $150 in the US, and the fish was as fresh as you can imagine. This is the reason why companies like Burberry and Kering, who owns Gucci, are reporting declines in revenue everywhere except Japan. Stripping out the currency effects, Kering's revenue from Japan rose 22% in the first half of the year, while Asia ex-Japan dropped 20%. The Chinese are not spending on luxury items at home and instead are using it to travel and spend it abroad. Tourists and tourism is now the number 2 biggest contributor to Japan's economy behind car sales. It should be no surprise then that we should see consistent improvement in Japanese retail sales and confidence this summer as tourists continue to support the economy. The weekend has also allowed businesses to raise wages and prices, which means that the everyday person in Japan will now have more money to spend. Many of you know from my photos on social media that I loved craft beer, and I love seeking out craft beers in different countries. Now, I went to a local bar in Japan. I spoke to the owner, who's actually Australian, and he married a local, and he has been telling me that the weak currency has impacted his business in that, the brewers who basically import all their hops from abroad have been hit by higher costs and forced to pass the higher costs on to the pubs. Now, he actually thinks that this is a good thing, and I think this is a view shared by many of the Japanese, because Japan has had a very hard time raising prices. He gave me an example of how 8 years ago, a Japanese candy company of Ice Bar, had their whole staff bow in apology for raising the price of Ice Bar by only 10 yen, which was the equivalent of 9 cents at the time. In February 2023, which really wasn't that long ago, not 8 years ago, a Japanese company also issued a heartfelt apology for raising prices by 10 yen, which is really only 6 cents. And American companies wouldn't even think about that. Nowadays, Japanese firms are able to raise prices without batting an eye because the weekend has given them the perfect excuse. And since so many companies are starting to do it, it makes it easier for many others, even small businesses, to follow. And this is the reason why inflation is on the rise in Japan and will continue to rise for some time. This is much needed normalization of Japan's pricing structure and something that the country desperately needs because prices are just too low. And many other things have also changed in Japan. We had the opportunity to visit the top 3 cities for tourists, Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, with a side trip to the beautiful Mount Fuji, a highlight of my son's trips. Interestingly enough, Tokyo was not crowded at all. Here's a clip from Akihabara, the infamous electric town, which is known for stalls and large department stores specializing in selling electronics, manga, anime, video games, you name it. It's in the middle of the day with barely anybody behind me, and you can see that it's pretty deserted. Osaka and Kyoto, on the other hand, was packed. Just look at these people behind my son at the Fushima Inari gates. This is a fraction of the people who are walking up the route to see the 1,000 red gates. Far more people are also speaking English than in my first visit in 2005 or even my more recent visit in 2015 when I took my oldest son. Another thing I noticed is that cash is no longer king. A lot of the transactions, especially in the big cities, now cashless after the Olympics. Third, a lot of electronic shops have been replaced with Pokemon shops, gachapon, or capsule toy machines, claw machines, and arcades. Now, the trading culture has always been strong in Japan because gambling, trading, and these games of chance are everywhere. In the trains, at the 7-Eleven convenience stores, on the streets. And there are more adults than kids playing these games. And with wages rising, I see only more trading interest from the Japanese. If you're interested in more videos about fundamentals, definitely subscribe to our channel. If you want to learn more about fundamentals, how to understand what affects an economy or currency, how it relates to trading, there's a link in the description below for my fundamentals trading course. You can also get this completely free if you're outside the US and you open and fund an account with ACAP, our favorite Forex and CFD broker. I will see you all next time.